proud defender of the American dream, Rick Smith.
Welcome back to the Rick Smith Show. Check out the website, thericksmithshow.com. Questions, comments, something on your mind. You can email me, Rick, at thericksmithshow.com. So yet another tragedy. When does it end? When does it stop? When do our elected leaders do something? I mean, really. You've got Florida Governor Rick Scott, who is running for U.S. Senate there in Florida. He told reporters after the shooting that society needed to figure out why young men like the 24-year-old murderer was killing people. He said, quote, "They're not valuing life. Something is causing that. There's something wrong," he said. Whether it's the parents or the grandparents, whether it's our schools, whether it's our churches or synagogues, whether it's elected officials, there's something that's changed in our society that young men don't have value like they used to. He also went on to suggest that maybe there just aren't enough role models. It's certainly not the guns. Certainly not that. It's got to be everything else. And I'm actually kind of surprised he didn't say video games, which really would have been in bad taste. Just incredible. Here to share some thoughts on not just Scott's comments, but where do we go? What do we do? When do we finally say enough is enough? Which is why I've asked Khary Penebaker to come talk with us, a gun violence survivor, a board member at Everytown, and a survivor fellow at Everytown, and a member of Moms Demand. Khary, thanks for taking time for us.
Hey, brother. Thanks for having me on again.
So this is getting all too familiar. A horrible tragedy happens. The right-wing spin machine goes into it's everything else, everybody else's fault, but the gun.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, this is, they've been well trained for this because of how many shootings we actually have, they've got the routine down. Shooting happens, we all cry and we mourn, and then it's thoughts and prayers, and then nothing. So they know exactly what to do. In the midst of all that, they'll start to blame something else, whether it's mental health or it's something else. It's something else, but it's never access to the gun. They never want to actually be able to take responsibility for anything and say, hey, you know what? Maybe we shouldn't let everybody just have a gun anywhere, anytime, and for any reason. And until we get to a place where our elected officials or those who would like to be one believe that, we can have reasonable restrictions on access to firearms, this is just going to be like second nature for America, and it's really unfortunate. There was a guy yesterday playing in the tournament who said, "I'm lucky. I only got shot in the thumb." To think that's what makes you lucky in America, where you only got shot in the thumb. That young man should be lucky to win the tournament, win the lottery or something like that, not lucky that you only got shot in the thumb. That is a sad state of affairs in our country.
No, you're absolutely right. And, it's one of these things where as I was thinking about Scott's comment, because I've heard this comment, thousands of times, and I'm sure you have as well.
Sure.
It's society. Society has changed. Mm-hmm. And, I remember growing up as a kid, and I remember hearing about shootings. Mm-hmm. And, there were shootings in my neighborhood. The difference, and there's a huge difference, is when I was a kid, the shootings that happened were usually a .38 special where you had 6 shots. That was it. Today, you've got these and easily accessible, these weapons that can shoot, 20, 30, 50 rounds before you have to reload.
Right.
I mean, this is part of the problem. And the other part of it is and maybe you know more about this than I do, but evidently this murderer went and had psychiatric treatment and was able to purchase a gun with no problem whatsoever.
Right. Well, I mean, there is a bit of a misnomer about whether or not he had psychiatric treatment and how that might play into whether or not he can buy a gun. So unless he was mentally adjudicated to be mentally deficient, where he would have said, I'm not guilty by reason of insanity, or he was in forced confinement, then his mental treatment would not have triggered a rejection.
But shouldn't it?
It depends. That's a much more difficult and intricate conversation. But I do think, though, for one, that we have got to make sure we do not scapegoat those of us who have and who struggle with mental illness. There are millions of Americans that struggle with mental illness, and to continue to pigeonhole us as being victims, as being violent when 95% of the time we are the victims of a crime rather than the perpetrator of it. But to me, that's just another way for those who refuse to talk about gun violence. It's just another excuse for them, another way for them to find something else. They don't really want to talk about gun violence. And in fact, if you ask them to be honest, they don't even want to talk about mental health care either. Because in America, it is much easier to get a gun than it is to get your first mental health care appointment. There's something fundamentally wrong when that's the dynamic that we're faced with, where you can get a lethal weapon, but you can't get mental health care help. There's something wrong.
I'm with you, and I don't want to demonize the mentally ill. I have friends who struggle with demons, but you know the first thing that you want to make sure is that guns aren't that easily accessible. That you know that people who have had struggles, and look, and I'm not trying to beat up on people, but
no, I know, yeah.
But there has to be some, in my view, there've got to be some steps in this.
And there are. So there are good policies, for example, like red flag laws, which there are a number of states, including Florida, have, where if a family member, if they recognize that you're in a state of crisis, can have your guns temporarily removed from your possession. Waiting periods that can help when you have crimes of passion. So there are things that can be done, but you know it's not a case where you know if you go to a therapist, and all of a sudden you aren't allowed to buy a gun. Now there should be policies like where you can self-restrict or prohibit yourself from being able to buy a gun. A number of states have a policy like that for gambling. If you have a gambling addiction, you can put yourself on a list. You're prohibited from entering a casino. The same thing should apply to gun access. I will tell you it with all honesty. I would put myself on that list. I do not belong being able to buy a gun. And there are a number of other people who would do the same thing.
Well, really? I mean, because why would you? I mean, you just wouldn't buy one. I mean, why would you need the list?
Oh, so in that case, that's a matter of preparing yourself against when you have the impulse of self-harm.
Okay.
Because in many cases, like for example, when my mom shot and killed herself, she attempted suicide twice before with pills. Both were ineffective. We know that statistically speaking, you have about 5% chance of dying from pills because you have time. But when you realize, hey, it's easier, right, to complete suicide with a gun, it's relatively painless if you put the gun in the right place, I guess, like my mom did when she shot herself in the head. And it's easy, right? You don't have to in America, you don't have to go through a whole lot to get it. It's easier to get a gun than you get a prescription filled. So when you find that you have that easy access and you're cognizant of the fact that you are mentally unwell, then you put yourself on one of these lists to prepare yourself if you are impulsive to the point where you were considering self-harm.
No, that's an excellent point. I actually had never thought of that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I definitely, again, I'm not ashamed of it at all. I want to make sure that people know that there's a lot of things you can do in this world, in this country, despite the fact that you may be struggling with a mental illness one way or the other, that it's not the be-all, end-all of you. You can do some pretty good things with yourself, but you got to make sure that you put some safeguards in your life so that you don't end up harming yourself. And I'm not ashamed of that one bit.
No, and nor should you be. So, I mean, that's a good start. I mean, why isn't something like that, something that we do more often? I mean, I know you said some states do these kind of things, but if you could just go to the next state over and usurp whatever you have here, it seems kind of, well, sure.
Yeah. I mean, that's really a function of how much the gun death lobby has purchased our elected officials. They pay them for inaction. They pay them to create these narratives that don't exist. This idea that we want to have reasonable restrictions on gun access. Now it's the equivalent of, you want to take my guns from me, right? They pay them to make these things up. If you listen to, Wayne LaPierre's convention speeches every year, they are progressively darker and darker and darker, simply because they want to create this aura of fear. But because they know that without the black boogeyman, right, they got to create this idea that you have to be afraid of the other simply so they can sell more guns. And if you have politicians who are trying to do the right thing, which is usually, in most cases, not going to be advocating for gun sales, when gun sales go down, so do the profits of the NRA. It's a never-ending cycle. And that's exactly what they pay for. Well, they get nothing.
Yeah, I mean, it's incredible that we're in this position. And I mean, it's I was watching one of the mouthpieces for the NRA, and the boogeyman, as you pointed out, that they're pitching now is, you need a good guy with a gun in the area. So there should have been armed security everywhere.
Sure. Yeah.
And again, that's another distraction from the fact that someone went in and shot a bunch of people, and legally got guns and drove them evidently to Florida, which questions the interstate stuff. But again, it's not the gun.
Right. It's everything but the gun. But what I'll tell you though, that I've done a couple events with the Parkland students, the March for Our Lives and the Road to Change tour. I think those students have ignited a conversation and a movement that our country has, I believe, has been desperate for. And I think they are changing the overall dynamic around gun violence and gun violence prevention to the point where, the effectiveness of the NRA and the people like them are going to be pretty much rendered impotent. I mean, these young folks are doing something that, like the students of the 50s and 60s were doing, right? But are very specific about this. And I think that's going to change the tide of all of this. And, are we ever going to have a zero number of gun deaths? Probably not. That doesn't mean we shouldn't work towards it, because every day there are 96 people whose lives are ended as a result of gun violence. And if we are silent, we're complicit. And I think if we listen to these young folks, what they're trying to do, support them and elevate their voices and their stories and their efforts, I think our country will be far safer than whatever the NRA could imagine us to be.
And it's that move towards a more perfect union.
Absolutely. And to think it's young folks that are doing it. That is the most exciting part about it.
No, and the sad thing is you've got people who are demonizing them. Right.
Who not only are demonizing, but have a massive platform, who should have some sense of responsibility to know that's probably inappropriate, right? But they aren't concerned with right or wrong or saving lives. They're concerned with ratings and money. And these would be the first ones to preach to you about being Christian. It's nonsense. It's absolute nonsense. These young folks are out there trying to save lives, and I'm proud that David Hogue and all the other kids are doing everything they can to make sure that no one else knows my nightmare. I can't tell you.
Or theirs. I mean, the reality is these are kids who suffered a tragedy, and because it's actually given me the opportunity to talk to my kids about it. Mm-hmm. What does the school do? Have they practiced this stuff? Is this something that you've had to prepare for? Is it the reason they locked down the schools like an armed camp? And the answer is all yes. And it's something that, I'm 51. It's something that's completely foreign to me. The idea is that the school is completely locked down, and not accessible, to wherever. And this is what this generation of kids, my kids' generation, have had to grow up with.
I mean, we're raising a generation of kids who are, enveloped in trauma. It's not just the lockdown drills. It's the fact that they are wondering, am I next? That should be a crime for us, right? That should be something we should never, ever accept. But for the NRA and those like them, all that means is it's another chance for us to go sell guns because people are afraid. And that is simply wrong. Yeah. I don't want to have to, feel like I need to go anywhere and be heavily armed or be around heavily armed people to try to enjoy it. We shouldn't have to be armed while you're playing PlayStation. You shouldn't have to be armed when you go to the movies or to the theater or to church or to the grocery store or to school. I mean, there's no way we can accept any of this as being normal. This is abnormal. It just comes to the point where it seems like too many of us are accepting it, but I'm not one of them.
No, but here's the thing, and I get this a lot every time I broach this topic with admitted gun nuts. The one guy that I'm thinking of, actually he carries his gun to church, and he said, look, we as parishioners, we know who's carrying, and we've put our families in areas, to make sure, and they're tactically thinking about going to church. And I don't know if they're preparing for if a tragedy happens or if they're hoping one does.
Sure.
Which is kind of twisted, but
Yes.
that's the vibe I got.
Right.
And I'm going, how do you make sure that we are not vulnerable? And when you go to the mall or you go, here or there or to church or school, how do you do that? I'm really not sure what the path forward is on this.
Well, I mean, if you think about that last scenario about the guy going to church while armed, if you think about a police officer as they might be providing security at a concert, that officer is not watching the concert because they have to be watching the crowd or whatever part of that auditorium they're watching, because they need to focus on they need to have situational awareness, right?
Right.
You can't be in church listening to your pastor, your reverend, whoever's speaking, and engaged in that conversation, hearing the word of God and all that stuff. You can't be doing that and have situational awareness. It just simply does not work. You can't have one and the same, right? I think it's folks like that who are romanticizing the idea that maybe they could stop something. But most folks don't even take the time to go get the kind of training they need to be prepared to stop a bad guy with a gun.
Yeah, as we saw,
you're more likely to shoot yourself or someone you know than an assailant. They forget that part of the conversation.
No, in fact, I often remind my gun nut friends, a policeman that I knew years ago who used to, he actually did tactical training, and he reminded me that, the majority of police officers who are killed on the job or who are shot with their own gun within 3 feet. Because there's a wrestle for the gun because the gun is there. And he also pointed out that, most people, when they pull the gun, aren't ready to use it and end up, on the wrong side of it as well. It's just one of those things. Before I let you go, I wanted to ask you one more thing, because today a federal court, a U.S. District Court actually, extended the ban on the online distribution of 3D printed gun blueprints. I'm looking at, anything that we could do legislatively to stop the purchase of guns and the continued saturation. Once this blueprint is out on the internet or anywhere, doesn't all that go by the wayside?
Kind of yes and no. I mean, I think this is something that is a way for folks to try to go beyond or usurp good gun policy where those policies do exist, and I think that's wrong. I don't think it's right to have someone be able to print a gun like that. I mean, again, you think about 2/3 of all gun deaths are gun suicides, like my mom. And if someone is a prohibited purchaser, whether they are suicidal or a domestic violence perpetrator, if they got the right equipment, they could buy it and make it at home and thereby not have to go through a background check. I think that's wrong.
I'm with you.
And as a civilized society, we need to be able to draw some lines in the sand and say, hey, this is a bridge too far. We don't accept this in our society. It's just simply the wrong thing to do, and we're not going to allow it to happen.
It's going to be interesting to see how that plays out. But again, another horrible tragedy, and another day of hearing the gun nuts say it's everything else.
Right, and that's unfortunate, but sadly,
predictable.
Shooting that happened yesterday it was not the first, and it unfortunately will not be the last.
Khary, I appreciate the thoughts, the ideas. Appreciate the time.
All right, brother. Thanks for having me on.
Good stuff. Khary Penebaker. Again, this is one of those moments where when is enough, and when do we start acting? Just kind of a thought. Quick break. Right back.
We chase the penthouse from the basement. Our current rat race, we run to stand still. This is a fading American dream. I've got no time now to go and climb now. For a second chance, come on and go for. I'm just searching for my dignity. This is a fading American dream. This is a fading American dream. This is a fading American dream.
You're listening to The Rick Smith Show.
I'm Rick Smith, and this is Labor History in 2. On this day in labor history, the year was 1921. That was the day that the Green Bay Packers football team received a charter from the American Professional Football Association. A year later, this would become the National Football League. The Green Bay Club had started up 2 years earlier. Its original sponsor was the Indian Packing Company in Green Bay, Wisconsin. They packaged canned meat. Meat packaging was a major industry in the Midwest during this era. Packing plants in Chicago, Kansas City, Iowa, and Wisconsin processed the cattle and pigs raised in the West as meat to feed the nation. Curly Lambeau was a shipping clerk for the company. He helped to organize a group of local players into a football team. Curly persuaded his boss to donate money for the uniforms, and it was there that the name Packers was born. When the Indian Packing Company fell on hard times, they were bought out by Acme, another packing company based in Chicago. So, for a brief moment, the Green Bay Packers, one of the staunchest rivals of the Chicago Bears, was actually owned by a Chicago company. Although Acme only owned the team for 1 year, the team nickname stuck. Lambeau was able to buy the team back. He went on to become the Packers coach, leading them to 6 championships. The Green Bay Packers are not the only American sports franchise that's name harkens back to a particular kind of labor. Another Wisconsin team, the Milwaukee Brewers baseball team, is a reference to that city's proud beer brewing tradition. In Big Ten sports, the Purdue Boilermakers and Nebraska Cornhuskers take to the gridiron each week with names that reflect the working traditions of the cities where the teams play ball. Labor History in 2 brought to you by the Illinois Labor History Society and The Rick Smith Show. For more information, go to laborhistoryin2.com, like us on Facebook, and follow us on the Twitters at Labor History in 2.
The most
Check out the website, thericksmithshow.com. Questions, comments, something on your mind, you can email me, rick at thericksmithshow.com. So let's find out what's going on in Washington, D.C. and around the world. Bob Ney, Talk Media News. Bob, thanks for taking time for us.
Well, thank you, Rick.
So what's going on in the nation's capital? All of the hubbub over Trump deciding not going to lower the flag today, then decided to lower the flag today. What's going on? I mean, even this we can't figure out.
Well, yeah, the Legion, really came out yelling about that. So he reversed himself and extended it. But, it's something, from the grave, John McCain and Trump are still going at it, even though John McCain's passed on. And President Trump, of course, is going to have to understand, he's not been invited to the funeral. Does no good to fight all this. Just let it go. I mean, the two of them, have had some hostility, and of course, the family expressed they didn't want him at the funeral. But then again, he said, a lot of things about McCain, so those things happen. But only in D.C. can death become political.
Yeah.
It's the way it runs. I myself had a long battle with McCain, and he didn't care for me, and I didn't care for him. And we battled each other over issues, but at the end, what are you going to do with it? You're going to just go on about it. He did serve his time in Vietnam. He was tortured. He was outspoken. Didn't agree with everything with him, but he's got an iconic position amongst Democratic and Republican members, and the president's got to understand that and just keep moving.
Yeah, that's never going to happen. This president's never going to understand that. And he's always going to feel chafed, and he's always going to lash out. And look, I wasn't surprised that the family doesn't want Trump anywhere around.
Mm-hmm. Right.
I did find it interesting that they invited Pence, though.
Well, yes. Right. Well, Pence had served with him, too, in the House when he was in the Senate.
And I'm surprised that Trump would allow Pence to go.
I don't think you could stop that. That would be, would be tough.
Yeah, I forbid you to go. I mean, isn't it kind of bizarre? I mean, isn't it really bizarre that we're having this discussion about somebody who died? I mean, look,
yeah.
I know most people weren't really fond of McCain. I mean, he was abrasive, from what I understand. But the guy's gone. Okay, let it go. His family's mourning. Let it go.
Right, I agree.
Like
I said, I fought him, and he fought me, and it's just what it is.
So now, what's the schedule for this? I understand he's going to be laid in state in Arizona.
In Arizona, then Friday at the Capitol. Only 31 people in the history of the country, starting with Abraham Lincoln, have laid in state. So it's a big deal. It's a huge honor. It's got to be agreed to bipartisan, and it was. And then Saturday is Mass at the Washington National Cathedral. I think President Obama and President Bush will probably say something. And then he'll be interned in Annapolis, next to a buddy of his that was an admiral. I think it was Larson, one of the two.
Now is the cemetery there at Annapolis, is that for all people who graduate from Annapolis, or is that just certain few? Because I was thinking about that today.
I don't know. That's a good question. I don't know.
Because I actually know a couple of people who had gone there. And it's one of those things it got me thinking today when I saw it, because I'm like, wow, I would have thought he would have been buried at Arlington or something like that. But to see there, it made me think, I guess maybe that's where you go when you went to.
Right, because members could be buried at Arlington, but yeah, he must want to go there.
Yeah. So were you surprised that it was the tweet?
Yes, I was, because again, even though they argued in things, I was surprised, because it formally would be done in a White House statement, and his staff wanted to do that, and they drafted one, and he nixed it. Now, the other thing is, a buddy of mine showed me an Instagram. Have you seen the Instagram message?
No.
Have you seen it yet?
No, okay. I didn't know there was an Instagram message.
Yeah, I accuse this of being fake news, but my friend says it's real, and it's a picture of the president standing there, President Trump, wishing condolences to the family with his own picture.
Oh, no, I saw that. I saw him wishing them condolences.
But it had his picture on it on Instagram. I thought it was fake, but my friend says it's real.
I'm surprised he wasn't standing over top of it looking down on him.
Yeah, so I just saw it. So
how screwy. But today the White House did issue a statement.
Right, they issued a statement, but again, he just issued it by tweet, and you normally issue a statement on it, and then he didn't call him a hero. He just condolences to the family. Bad blood, but the way he did it, created a bigger controversy.
Yeah. But then it looked like, they put out a statement today, it looked like a PR flack who said, we better try and cover Donald's behind because he's taking a beating, as he should. I mean, this is one of those things he should seriously take a beating over. Even with the base, I don't know how you justify this. And I know Fox News is probably spinning as fast as they can to justify it. No justification whatsoever.
Yeah, just, you praise the guy and move on.
Yeah, it's that simple. Let's move on. Some interesting stuff. A group of Senate Republicans are responding to the latest ACA lawsuit. What's going on?
Well, this one's bizarre. This is a cover your rear end, Rick, pure and simple. There is a lawsuit, and around September the 5th, oral arguments begin, and Justice is trying to basically undo at the Supreme Court the pre-existing condition clause. And, of course, if that happens, people are really, really going to be stuck. And then there's been an executive order which has dismantled a portion of the American Care Act. So the senators are basically saying, we're introducing a piece of legislation. Well, first of all, there's, 3 legislative days left. And just in case those arguments are successful, we'll have this piece of legislation. Now, the reason they're doing it is because the Democratic side has realized that they had an issue that used to be an anchor around their neck, which was health care, is now an anchor around the Republicans' neck because they didn't do anything about health care. They promised to repeal it or tweak it or fix it, and it's become worse. Premiums are going to rise, so that's an issue now. And it's an issue, interestingly enough, in a fascinating way that's hurting them. First of all, the Republicans are hurt because their base wanted the bill undone and they didn't do it. And then they're hurt with other people that are not their base because the premiums are going up. And if these oral arguments are successful, then pre-existing conditions are out the window, and then good luck trying to get health care. So this is a cover your rear end bill because, again, if the Democratic side really puts this in perspective in the fall in campaign ads, they're going to do some damage with the health care issue to the Republicans.
As they should. I mean, look, you ran on repeal and replace. I know they only ran on the repeal thing, but they never even had a plan to replace it with, outside of course, pay or die. And this is the thing that gets me. They didn't even try and roll out the old bad ideas, which I guess originally were the ACA. But not even the health savings accounts or any of that stuff they bothered to roll out. They had nothing.
Well, I think that within 2 years, Rick, this thing is going to go like a nuclear bomb, and the premiums, the lack of access, it's just going to roll back. Yeah. And I think it's going to become, a major issue, just like it was before, and it's going to have to be dealt with.
No, I fear you're right. I fear they've done enough damage that down is the only direction it can go. I mean, they haven't tweaked anything. I mean, if you go back to the history of Medicare, it was the same kind of scenario. It started off, didn't cover an awful lot. There were a lot of attempts to try and kill it, but over time they improved it, and now, as I say all the time, when my grandmother was alive, if you tried to take Medicare from her, she'd beat you with her walker. And I think Republicans learned the lessons, and they never allowed them to tweak anything. So for all those years, nothing's gotten fixed, and they've only made it worse by getting rid of the fine. So you don't really have to get the insurance; you can go without. And now trying to end pre-existing conditions and all that, they're just setting it up for destruction.
Mm-hmm. Yes, and there were some weak points of the American Care Act in the sense of the pharmaceutical industry was not touched. Joe Lieberman completely screwed up buying in at 50 with Medicare because he represents an insurance state, Connecticut. So he messed that up. That was out of the original Obama bill, was taken out. And a few other things, however, there were still basic coverages for people that haven't had it for years and pre-existing conditions. Now it's pulled apart here and pulled apart there in tiny pieces, and this court case. So, and then Medicaid expansion, some of the attorney generals are going after that. And if you put this all together in a package, I think it's just going to blow up, and the premium should be rising before the election.
It's going to be interesting to see how that plays out. But I think your timing is about right because they've set the ticking bomb, and it eventually it'll go off. Let's talk budget. I was kind of hoping for another 24 episode, another ticking bomb down to the last minute. Are we going to crash the global economy? Are we not going to pay our bills? I was really hoping for one of those. You're saying it's not going to happen.
No, even this Congress, it's too dramatic for them, too close to the election, both sides. This is almost like one of those things where they're out there arguing, and they all go into the House or Senate dining room, and the door shuts, and you can't tell a Republican from a Democrat because they're all like, okay, we kind of saved each other today, didn't we? So that's basically what they've done. They are very proud of themselves in the Senate that they have 7 bills or something they actually debated and passed, but what they're going to do is take everything left over and just roll it onto one package, continuing from last year, which is a horrible way to do budgets, and they're going to pass it that way and get through this. And, of course, President Trump talks about the wall and the veto, and he's not going to do it. No, nobody's going to do it. This is too close. This is going to be September.
Yeah, we'll see how that plays out. And you're right. I'm not expecting anything crazy there as well. Let's move on. Kavanaugh. Are we going to see the confirmation? Is it going to happen?
Unless there is something really horrible that we don't know about, he is in. Because there are 4 prominent figures, 2 R's, 2 D's, Murkowski and Collins on the Republican side, senators, Manchin and Heitkamp on the Democratic side, North Dakota and West Virginia. And they're all indicating, okay, basically my concerns are kind of solved. So you just name those 4, and there shouldn't be any surprises. He's going to be confirmed. It's a done deal. Again, unless there's something really, really nasty out there that we don't know about.
Yeah, and well, that could happen. I'm still got the fingers crossed because look, Labor Day's coming up. I guess the whole confirmation process starts on the 4th. So whatever it is, it better come up quick.
That's right.
Or you could kiss a lot of the 20th century goodbye. Any progress there goodbye, because I think they take us right back to the good old days of the 80s and 90s and not the 1980s and 90s. But hey, news today. Could be a new trade agreement with Mexico. No more NAFTA. We're gonna give it a zippy name like United States-Mexico trade agreement.
This is interesting. I don't know what's always in it. The president announced it. Canada could go along, or it could be lateral and just us and Mexico. Isn't it kind of ironic that we ended up maybe settling something with Mexico first?
Yeah.
I mean, I would have normally thought Canada would have been an easy one, but it's Mexico.
I gotta wonder what's in it, though, and this is one of those things. I've heard some good things. Look, I'm not going to completely trash it because I've heard they bumped up the U.S. content in cars from 62% up to 75%. If that's true, fabulous. I guess that there's a minimum wage of like $16 an hour for a certain percentage of the parts that are made. I don't know how they're going to enforce that, but it's nice language so far. But again, devil details. Trump not a detailed guy. I don't know.
Well, I was surprised. Like I said, Mexico first. So let's see what happens and see if Canada comes along.
Yeah, it will be interesting to see. And look, I'll give him credit if it's a good deal. I mean, if it really is going to help American workers, I'll be one of the first ones to say, good job, because I've been trashing him on everything else because he deserves it. And finally, you've got a jail could be a death sentence for a person with mental illness. I guess that's fairly true because I look, here in Philadelphia, there was a guy who served, it was like 550 days for stealing 3 peppermint patties because they couldn't find a mental health treatment center to put him in.
Well, on this one, there's a study, Marquette, not a study, it was an investigation. And they have 7 cases. There's a ton more, but they highlight 7 cases of people that had died in incarceration due to mental illness and the stress in different situations, or killing themselves over any period from 1 day to months, and so they bring out in this investigation a lot of the problems, because back in the 60s we quit institutionalizing, but we just turned to the prisons to institutionalize the mentally ill,
right,
who were doing things. On a personal note, I served time in Morgantown Federal Corrections, and I can tell you right now, Rick, because I saw it right up front, they put people in the hole, that's the isolation, and for acting up or something, and they had forms of mental illness, and it could make permanent damage to them. Number 2, you had on our in the prison, we had people there that absolutely had forms of mental illness, and of course were harassed or constantly dealt with by the guards, and it wasn't a professional manner, and they were there. I mean, it was housing for people with mental illness that wasn't designed for it.
Yeah.
I saw it myself.
No, I remember back.
It's rampant.
I remember back. I think it was 2000. It was like 2005. I had done a series of shows. The state of Pennsylvania closed a lot of the state mental health hospitals, and one of them here in the area was a pretty big one. And I had done a Hungry and Homeless for the Holidays food drive, where I lived in a parking lot for 10 days and collected food. And what I had done is I had set up a bunch of refrigerator boxes, and then the thought was I would charge people rent to play homeless. But what ended up happening is a bunch of the homeless who stayed behind the supermarket where we did this came out and actually stayed with us. And, every night I would cook hot dogs, and we'd have like 30 or 40 people show up to have hot dogs, and we would talk, and, I got their stories. And most of the people that I met in our community here where I live who were homeless weren't drug addicts or alcoholics or any of the things that I had expected. Most of them were people who were suffering from some demon, be it, some kind of, war thing, be it, some kind of, PTSD or some kind of abuse as a child, or, a whole range of stuff. And I remember saying, I think it's stupid closing the hospital. And I was contacted by the governor's office, it was a Democrat, Rendell at the time, and the mayor of the community I live in, who was a Republican at the time, both of them lambasting me for being irresponsible in saying that the homeless population in the area was suffering from mental illness and needed treatment, and that the hospital, they were using the prisons, the local jail as the surrogate. And, I go back to that and I go, it's exactly what it was then, now, only worse.
Correct. Yeah, I guess I lived amongst it. I saw it.
Sad, sad stuff. But, Bob, I appreciate the time, the thoughts. Good stuff, man.
Thank you.
As always, our good friend Bob Ney, Talk Media News. Quick break, right back. Stick around. You're listening to The Rick Smith Show. We're working people. Come to talk.
Radio of, for, and by we the working people. The Rick Smith Show.
Welcome back to The Rick Smith Show. Check out the website, thericksmithshow.com. So an interesting story about another McCain story that, again, shows you what kind of a person he was. According to The Hill, they were saying that back in 2008, when he was running for president, he rejected Paul Manafort to run his campaign. And the reasoning, I think we all know what the reasoning is. He had concerns about Manafort's ties to Russian oligarchs. And the thing is open secret even back then. But according to the news outlet that reported that his campaign manager, a guy named Rick Davis, had worked with Manafort at a lobbying firm. And they were going to bring him in, evidently, to run the campaign because, he was well-connected and could bring in lots of money. Gee, I wonder from where. And, Trump's like, nope, not getting into that. That would be bad. That wouldn't end well. And, you look, there's wanting to win, and then there's wanting to win at all costs and being desperate about it and willing to, break the rules and all of the stuff that, Trump's did. Like having, Russian agents come to your office, peddling dirt on your opponent, brought to you by a foreign adversary. Just kind of a thought, just kind of throwing that out there. And does anybody believe that the meeting didn't happen, or that they wouldn't have been eager, as arrogant and as entitled as they are? You don't think that they would be completely willing and eager to have that meeting to get that dirt so that they could get their entitled win? Of course they did. And I'm sure by the time we find out everything else that went on, it will be much, much, much worse. But here again, you had back then, McCain knew better. Just amazing stuff. There are moments where you go, I can't believe it was this open, that it was this out, and it was completely missed by the vast majority of the mainstream media. Just kind of throws that, wow. Anyway, if you missed any of the program, thericksmithshow.com is where you get the podcast. The Rick Smith Show app on the smartphone. Take the program on the go wherever you go. As always, you can email me, rick@thericksmithshow.com. Quick break. Right back with hour 2. Stick around.
Controversial, thought-provoking, opinionated. Rick Smith.
Have you noticed that Donald Trump constantly prefaces his outlandish lies with such phrases as, to be honest with you, to tell the truth, and believe me? Why? Because, like a snake oil salesman, he constantly needs to convince himself that he's speaking the truth in order to perform his next lie convincingly. The show must go on and on. In fact, he already ranks as the lyingest president in U.S. history, and that includes Nixon, Trump's biggest whopper is that he's an honest-to-God populist, standing up for America's hard-hit middle class against Wall Street, corporate lobbyists, and moneyed elites. This prevarication has duped many working stiffs into thinking he's their champion. The huckster doubled down on this lie in his inaugural address last year, pompously declaring, "The forgotten men and women of our country will be forgotten no longer." That's why a new straight-talking pamphlet by the watchdog group Public Citizen is so important. It exposes the people's champion as a rank fraud who is pushed from day one to further enrich and empower corporate elites he had denounced as a candidate. Public Citizen's report documents with concise, easy-to-grasp specifics how Trump, the faux populist, has systematically sold out the working families whose votes he cynically swiped, handing our government to a kakistocracy of corporate plutocrats. This is Jim Hightower saying, it's not merely that he's an irredeemable liar, but that Trump himself is a lie. The Public Citizen expose is titled, "Forgetting the Forgotten, 101 Ways Donald Trump has Betrayed the Middle Class," and it drives the stake of truth through the heart of his populist pretensions. Don't just read it. Use it like a Thomas Paine pamphlet to spread the truth. To download a free copy, go to corporatepresidency.org/forgotten.
Hightower's commentaries are brought to you by the Hightower Lowdown, the monthly newsletter with Hightower's take on what Wall Street and Washington are up to. For information, visit hightowerlowdown.org.
Sanity for a change. The Rick Smith Show.
I'm still stuck on McCain's ex-chief of staff saying you don't want to put a small man in a big job. I really think that is the perfect way to sum up this administration. I mean, I really just very, very to the point, very succinct, very. I think that was the perfect line, and it really wasn't even a it was really good. Here's an interesting little bit. Duncan Hunter, the guy who threw his wife under the bus because, they evidently stole, $500,000 in campaign funds to pay for things like, the rabbit to take a trip, dental work, things like that. His surf shop, you needed to get his board waxed. I'm sure in more ways than one, since there are evidently a number of mistresses that allegedly he was paying for stuff for. So, we'll find out more about that. The insane part, the most recent polling has him leading his Democratic opponent by 8 points. How crazy. Just bizarre. Anyway, here to discuss some of the weekend's events and, what's going on with our narcissist in chief, our good friend Propane Jane. Jane, thanks for taking time for us.
You're welcome. Thanks for having me back.
So Duncan Hunter up by 8. That says a lot about the voting populace, doesn't it?
We have this conversation like every month, Rick.
Yeah.
I mean, there is inevitably a sociopath that is running on the Republican ticket. Every month, there's a story comes out that they're, using campaign funds on, things that they shouldn't be. They're involved in some type of, sexual harassment. They're involved with this, potential collusion with Russia. I mean, there's just so much going on, and week after week what we see is that the Republican base continues to dig in its heels, and these are their gangsters. These are their mob bosses. These are, they're cheering them on, and they are digging in their heels even more, I think, in spite of, and actually, to kind of, arrogantly say, hey, these are our guys and we're sticking by them no matter what. Or
there are congressmen who, is anti-abortion, but, threatens his mistress to get into getting an abortion. I'm just kind of throwing that out there too.
Yeah, I mean.
So at this point, nothing should surprise anyone. I mean, nothing surprises me, to be honest. I mean, there's really nothing that could possibly happen anymore. And this is how jaded I think we've become as a society, that our shock levels are fairly low.
Yeah, we're totally desensitized at this point. And I think that's just I think on the one hand, it's a good acknowledgement that, we are recognizing what we're seeing in some respects, and that, either you're on the side of it or you're on the side against it. And I think most people sort of know where they stand as far as that goes. And we just have to see, do people rise up? And is there sort of this silent, disapproval that we continue to see in the polls that is actually going to show up on election day and try to, turn the ship in a different direction? Because, at this point, it's instability in chief. That's all we've had for going on 2 years now.
Yeah, it's amazing. Are you surprised by any of the shenanigans around McCain's death? As Bob Ney said a moment ago, even even death is political in Washington.
It's political, but I've been thinking about this today because it's just the fact that he has gone so far away from decorum and just human decency. I think is a really big indication that there is this personal grudge and this just insidious hatred that he has for John McCain. And I just sort of was the psychiatrist brain that can't turn off. Just immediately starts thinking like, what is it about John McCain? Why is he so incensed? And I was watching Chris Hayes tonight, and he was showing, how going back over the years, how Trump just is fixated on this idea that, McCain wasn't really a war hero because he got captured, et cetera, et cetera.
It's the same thing. I don't mean to cut you up, but it's the same exact same thing that they did to John McCain. Or to John Kerry back in 2004 with the whole Purple Heart Band-Aid and all of that stuff.
Yeah, for sure. But I think for a man like Trump, who has, 5 deferments?
Yeah, we had bone spurs. Come on.
Well, but this is a guy who was sent to military school at age 13. And if you think back to that time and what was, glorified in our society, what was more patriotic a thing? Even to this day, than somebody who goes off to serve their country.
Yeah, but Jane, his sex life was like Vietnam, so we need to give him a pass.
Well, but he can't do that, and I think he's held. He is so intent on dragging John McCain down. I think because he is that man that he never was. Like you said, he wasn't somebody who was big enough to fill the shoes or to fill this job. And so somebody like John McCain, I think, is very intimidating for him because he does have this history of, yes, he was captured and he was a POW and he survived it. And I think that just really gets to Trump's core and his inadequacies and his insecurities about his manhood. And I think even about his ability to live up to that American ideal and dream of being this war hero. I think he's very scarred by the fact that he didn't live up to that ideal, and he wants to tear John McCain down because of that.
And I think the other part of it is, and whether you liked McCain or you didn't, you couldn't say he was ever a yes man.
Oh, yeah, for sure.
So, Trump only wants to surround himself with loyalists and yes men, and McCain wasn't that.
No, definitely not. But I think that is what, because, if you go back in the history, it's hard to really figure out, well, what is it that John McCain, ever did or said to Donald Trump that he just, is treating him this way? I'm not a, John McCain or Donald Trump expert in the sense that I could go back and tell you what that may have been. But even to this day, as they talk about this feud back and forth, nobody really ever says, well, what is it? What is the number one reason why they can't stand each other? And I think it's very petty. And it's almost like if you could just think back to high school, and it's like, these two guys that are kind of fighting with each other, and they want to be, prom king. And I think, Donald Trump is really revealing a lot about his own insecurities, and that's the root of his narcissism, is that low self-esteem.
Yeah, the interesting thing is that Trump didn't put out a statement. He sent out a tweet, didn't even mention McCain by name, and then immediately, today we wake up to the flags not at half mast. It just seems to be constant disrespect. And look, the guy's dead. You can't disrespect him anymore. He's not going to know it anymore. So let it go.
But how dare he not invite Trump to his funeral?
Yeah, would you have invited him?
No, I'm actually being sarcastic.
And I've told my wife, I've said, look, there are a bunch of people don't have anything for me because I don't want people showing up to make sure.
Yeah, for sure. And I think John McCain is. I'm 100% with him on not wanting Trump at his funeral. I think that's highly appropriate. But I think the insult that Trump takes to that, I mean, that's such an embarrassment. Can you imagine just how much of an international embarrassment that is? And John McCain is not the first. I mean, obviously, Barbara Bush also said he is not welcome at my funeral.
Right.
And so people are so disgusted by this man that they do not even want him to sully the moment and the environment of their going home ceremony. And so I think that that's just really poignant, and that speaks to the sociopathy. I mean, that speaks to how nasty he's been to people over the course of his whole life, and how people feel about him on their way out.
Yeah. So let me ask you the other side of this, because number 2, Mike Pence is going. Will this cause a rift with the narcissist in chief? I mean, because he wasn't invited, he was sent away, but Mike Pence was welcomed with open arms. I mean, do you see that could be a chafing point, or isn't he that petty?
I mean, I just think that he needs to target his fire at some point. I mean, every day he's going up against somebody else. He's at it with Jeff Sessions. He's at it with Michael Cohen. He, on any given day, I mean, for all you know, he may just totally forget about this. He may have done his little stunts that he did today, and then, tomorrow he's going to jump on to, back to the fact that, Manafort is guilty. There's so many balls in the air.
Yeah, I mean, this was a great distraction. I mean, if you really think about it, McCain died at the perfect time. I can use this as a distraction to having people not talking about my interaction with the Russians.
Exactly. I mean, and I think that, the staff, I mean, of course, this is, again, an embarrassment because it makes him look even worse. And now they've had to, sort of reissue statements and try to clean it up because it just looks so terrible. And so they're going to be ready to move on to the next thing. But unfortunately for them, the next thing is ultimately another disaster. I mean, this thing with NAFTA. Did you see how he couldn't even get on the phone, on the speakerphone?
I don't blame him for that. Look, he's never dialed a phone in his life. I mean, that was a fool's errand there. There was no way he was ever going to figure that out.
I mean,
that's it. And you know what that is? That's the failure of having the best people around him, because your staff should have known your technical abilities, and there should have been somebody waiting there to make sure that phone call went through without a hitch. His staff, and someone should be fired. If he fires someone tomorrow, I wouldn't complain about it, because there should have been someone there. But here again, this is a guy who only hires the best people, right?
Well, this is instability in chief. I mean, the person that would need to be fired would be him, because, again, everything that emanates around him is dysfunctional. He hires the best people. I mean, so far he's got however many felons. I mean, he's racking up convictions. And so I think that is a function of the man at the quote-unquote top. And, I mean, I think that these moments, these snafu moments that we never saw, from Barack Obama, this is what you sort of need to see, because it's pathognomonic. It is illustrative of the pathology that's going on there.
Yeah.
And that's why I call him instability in chief, because everything around him is so unstable, and it just isn't going to get any better. I don't care who they bring in there to try to clean it up.
No, I mean, it's really bizarre times, and it's an embarrassment. I mean, and I miss the Obama years just for there was a day off occasionally. There was, you got all the right wing attacks. In fact, I still get, this is one of those little bizarre stories that, here, Trump's been president since, January 20th of 2017. Here we are, closing in close to the end of 2018. I'm still getting stuff about Obama and how this latest one's just the greatest. And I remember it from a couple of years ago, but evidently he took all the flags out and put up a Muslim prayer rug, a Muslim prayer curtain. And I'm going, are there Muslim prayer curtains? I've never heard of that. But I had a relative send me this. See, he was a Muslim. I go, why are we talking about this now?
Because they're digging. I mean, they're digging.
All right.
Have you seen those, like, the, memes online where it's like the people and they have their head in the sand?
Yeah.
I mean, I think that that's just, again, indicative of the times that we're in. I mean, I think that this is really an embarrassment. And I think even people who are diehard Republicans recognize that. And
I hope they do.
Yeah, and so it's sort of like, okay, well, how do we cope with this? Like, do we face it head on? Do we try to be this, like, reform wing that now is sort of going to speak out against what's going on with Trump? They don't really have anybody that feels that comfortable doing that just yet.
Yeah.
And so they kind of have to just keep it to themselves. But I think that there is an inability to confront it head on. And so what they do is they just kind of dive into just whatever conspiracy theory is there. And obviously Fox News, I mean, that's all they do is churn out these, just ridiculous stories. And the people eat it right up. And obviously Trump is somebody who eats it right up. And they have that feedback loop because as soon as they start putting it on TV, then he starts tweeting about it. And then it becomes legitimate, quote unquote, simply because everyone is talking about it,
Yep.
And so I think it's like the opiate of the masses. I think that that's how they're getting themselves through this really embarrassing, shameful, disgraceful time in American history.
And I fear that, Trump gets on this QAnon kick and then they really go off the deep end and we have Pizzagate every week.
Yeah.
I mean, you see some of these characters and it's just really insane. And I rarely agree with Johnny Isaacson, the senator from Georgia. But I thought he had the right take on McCain. He said anyone who tarnishes the reputation of John McCain deserves a whipping. I'm almost on board with that. Especially if you start right there at the top.
So was he talking about Trump?
No, well, he was talking about anyone, So, this was in response to, the flag not being lowered and a whole bunch of that stuff. And then he used a qualifier by saying, I would say to the president or anyone in the world, it's time to pause and say, well, this was a great man. He gave everything for us. We owe him nothing less than the respect that he earned. So I'm taking it. He was talking to the president, and then as a qualifier, added everybody else in the world. But I'm thinking the whipping was directed at just one guy.
Yeah, I mean clearly, and I think that again the insult and the disgrace. When you think about the fact that John McCain was a presidential candidate. This is someone who ascended to that level in the Republican Party. But as a side note, which is still on the same subject, I saw a poll about McCain's approval rating, and I can't remember the numbers, but it's so much higher amongst Democrats than it is with Republicans.
Right. Well, because the healthcare vote. And in the way he did it, which again is another reason that Trump hates him.
As he was dying of cancer. Come on.
Well, there is that.
If there's any time that you understand the importance of Obamacare, it's when you're on your deathbed. And so I think that ultimately he was on the right side of history, and that is what you hear people talking about in terms of his greatest legislative achievements right now, no matter the fact that he's obviously been in government for decades.
So are you telling me then that we need an entire Congress full of people with brain cancer for them to do the right thing?
No, but did you know that John McCain and Ted Kennedy died exactly 9 years apart of the same cancer?
Wow, I did not know that.
Yeah. Speaking of the healthcare bill.
Yeah, now that I think about it, you're right. Because if I remember right, it was a year to the date that he died that I actually had him on the program to talk about.
Wow, that's an honor.
Yeah, I had him on, when during the campaign.
Right.
In 2008, he was doing, and we got to talk to him. In fact, the one show that we did, we had Hillary Clinton and Teddy Kennedy.
Oh, cool.
Which was really cool, and because it was right before the primary here and all that, and that's one of those interviews that the memory I just cherish because I liked Kennedy. I liked Kennedy. I thought he was on the right side of some things.
Yeah.
I also thought he was on the wrong side of some things, but I thought overall, much like McCain, that he loved the country and he wanted to move forward.
Yeah, I agree, and I think that is what is so just striking about those polls that show that discrepancy between the parties in terms of their approval of John McCain. And I think it really goes to show how extreme the Republican Party has become in the present day. That somebody with John McCain's, background and story, who again was their nominee for, president, that they've come so far to disdain him in some ways.
Well, the reason they disdain him is, and someone sent it to me today. I watched the concession speech, which I remember back then, but, I didn't pay a lot of attention to it.
Yeah.
But if you go and you watch his concession speech, wow. I mean, you talk about, caring about country more than self.
Right.
He was talking about, hey, we need to get behind this president. He did an amazing thing. He was able to, to get people who had never voted before or were disinterested.
Yeah.
He did all these wonderful things, and he was really trying to set the table for Obama to do well and to succeed, because he understood we were at a moment of crisis. And the camera panned to Sarah Palin, who looked just mortified and angry, and I
remember that.
And it's one of those moments, and there's a couple of them as well, where the woman calls Obama an Arab, and he's like, no, shuts her right down. And there were a number of those on the campaign where it was more about making sure that you ran on the issues than demonizing. And as I said at the beginning, look where we are now, where Trump would have just jumped all over the demonizing.
Yeah, and I read an interesting article. I believe it was in the Guardian, and it was just talking about how it said John McCain opened Pandora's box, and that when he chose Sarah Palin, Trump was basically hiding behind her and came in behind her, and I think in a lot of ways. In particular, because as the campaign season went on, I mean, that was the first time in a long time in American politics that we started to see these like hate rallies and this sort of like KKK rally without hoods thing. And people were really out there and calling Obama a monkey and just the things they were saying. I mean, it just
Michelle's a man.
It was disgusting. And I think that somebody like McCain, looked at that and understood like, oh my gosh, like this is attached to me, and I think that's why he has in the intervening years come out and say that he ultimately really regretted choosing her. I mean, kind of too little, too late. But I do think that in a lot of ways, John McCain was kind of horrified by what was unleashed in that campaign season and what continues to be upon us today.
Yeah, they brought her because she was a pretty face. First Republican woman to run as a VP. They thought that she would come along with the campaign and she would do the things that they needed a VP to do.
Yeah.
And what they found is someone who was just bat what crazy.
Right, and was just totally out of her depth. And that was when that mattered. I mean, again, amazing how time flies, and how we've come so far, and not in a good way.
Yeah.
But when, she was that Katie Couric interview, when she couldn't name the newspapers and just everybody was stunned.
The Economist. Because doesn't everyone read The Economist? That's what she came up with later down the road. I'm going, really? You couldn't come up with Newsweek? You couldn't come up with Time or USA Today? You couldn't come up with any of that? You couldn't come up with the Wasilla Times?
I mean, but again, Trump, we have a man now that is in that Oval Office who is mostly incoherent. I mean, I've been reading, like the transcripts of, like at the rallies. I mean, he's all over the place.
Yeah, he is.
He is completely all over the place. Like, and I'm doing a mental status exam on what is being put to paper, and I'm just kind of looking and going, am I the only one that recognizes how just totally disorganized this is?
Oh, yeah. And look, I remember, since we were talking about Palin, do you remember when Tina Fey did the exact reading of what Sarah Palin said, and everyone thought it was a great comedy bit? When all she did was
like really what she said.
Yeah, I mean, it's the same thing with Trump. I've actually on air tried to read some of his statements.
You can't do it,
and you literally cannot read them.
No, you can't.
And because it goes against every bit of the English language that we learned in third grade.
Yeah, but again, that's why his fans love him.
Because their mind works like that?
Well, because he's familiar.
Okay.
And he's not, elitist and, quote unquote, and I think that even though, obviously he's got gold toilets, but I think they literally mean that when he opens his mouth and he speaks, he sounds just like they do. No matter the fact that he's got, allegedly billions of dollars or, whatever, they still see him as somebody who thinks like them.
He was on TV.
Yeah, exactly. And he shares their same values. And, they hate the same people. And they like the same people. And so that's just their guy. And I think that that's the reason why so many people are willing to overlook such really significant, pathology, actually, because they're just sort of, feeling like he's kind of a folksy, just mirror image of themselves.
Wow, I sure hope, I don't often wish you wrong, but I'm sure hoping we're better as a country than that. Oh, my gosh.
We got to prove it.
Yeah,
we have to prove it. If we are, then we can prove it.
And will this McCain thing, will this wake anybody up? Because look, the American Legion evidently went ballistic today. There were a number of veterans groups who have, generally on the Republican side, politically. They're generally on the conservative side.
Yeah.
Do you think this wakes them up that, this was one of theirs that's being disrespected by the guy that they put on a pedestal? Do you think that moves the needle, or is this just another spat that we expect?
I think it's something that's expected. I think they like to wave their fingers around and say, bad boy, you shouldn't have done this. But ultimately, it is extremely difficult to peel away from that, roughly 25 to 30% that are going to be, on board no matter what.
Yeah, the guy who you see at the rally going, I agree with everything he did.
I mean, that was the same amount of people that approved of Bush Cheney at the end in
that's
2008.
True. But here's the thing, and I've yet to find, and maybe you'll be my first, but I've yet to find anybody who looked at Obama and said, I agree with everything he's done. I've yet to find somebody who was an Obama fan who would go to that extreme, say everything he did was like godlike. It was dictated from the high on the mount. I have yet to find that person.
No, and I think that's because most people who are actual Obama supporters have a mindfulness and an insight about them to know that that's not reasonable. That we can't always agree with even our spouses 100% of the time.
I don't agree with myself 100% of the time.
Exactly. I mean,
and look, I beat up on Obama a lot because I wanted him to be better. I wanted him to do certain things, but not because I didn't like him, but because look, I thought you should have done this. You should have done this better.
Yeah.
Not out of the kind of hatred we saw on the right wing. But there's not even those voices on the right now looking at Trump like I did to Obama, saying, no, I want you to be better. I want you to do the right things instead of, this.
No, because, again, that's like going against the 11th commandment. I mean, they cannot speak ill of each other.
Yeah, or thou shalt follow.
Exactly.
There you go. Crazy. Last question I've got for you. The reports are coming out of the White House that evidently Trump's been a little unhappy with Don McGahn, the White House general counsel. Are we expecting him to be fired? Because evidently, and I don't know if you've seen this, Trump is really evidently ticked off that McGahn won't draft a pardon for Manafort.
I had heard that. Wow.
Yeah, so he's the next one I expect out the revolving door after the guy who didn't put the phone right.
Who would he have left after that, though?
I'm sure. Look, Jeff Sessions is still around. I'm sure there's somebody out there who would, look. I've been flummoxed the whole time, going, who would want to work for this administration? I mean, even the kid who should have had the phone right took the job.
Yeah, I mean, I think that he's in between a rock and a hard place in that, even if he wants to get rid of him, who is going to take that job and be competent at it?
Rudy Giuliani.
Well, no.
There's the answer. Not competent, but I think he would take it. Hey, look, he dressed up in a dress for Donald.
Well, he would definitely take it, but he wouldn't be competent, and he would cause more problems for Trump than he's solving. And that's why they have to keep him off of TV. You know, they have to keep him off now because every time he gets on there, he's just continuing to put his foot in his mouth.
And thank goodness they do.
So I don't know. I think that Trump is disgruntled because he has no moves. You know, there are no more moves on the table for him to make, and he's a cornered animal, and he's getting more and more desperate and more outrageous the more he realizes how boxed in he is.
There's an excellent point. Yeah, I mean, because I got to imagine, and the reason I brought this up is because, you know, they're claiming he's, you know, kind of like a caged rat now because McGahn won't draft the pardon. You know, he wants to pardon him, but McGahn has said, if you do this, I'm leaving. Yeah. And there's, you know, there's been a bunch of that. So he is kind of in a box right now because, you know, if he fires McGahn, that doesn't look good. And the American people overwhelmingly don't want to see pardons. So going to be interesting.
Yeah, and I think even the lady, you know, she was the Trump voter that was on the jury for the Manafort trial. And, you know, she went on and on about how she really didn't want it to be so, but he really was just guilty.
Yep.
And so I think that there's an aspect of, you know, the Manafort situation that most thinking Americans and actually a good sizable chunk of Republicans even can see, like, okay, this is dead to rights here. And so the fact that, and there's even obviously like Jeff Flake is saying that would be like the red line in the sand or whatever.
Yeah. Well, yeah, I don't buy it.
I don't buy it either. But I think that if he starts to pardon, you know, Manafort or anything like that, then we've just taken so many steps further down at that point.
Yeah, but as Rudy said, it's only white-collar crime. It's almost not even like a real crime. Should have been a civil issue. Should have gotten a fine.
They still make prisons for that, though.
Yes, they do. But you know what? This is one of those things that when they write the history book, I would like to be alive in 50 to 100 years.
Yeah.
To see how historians look back on this and put it into a paragraph in a textbook that came out of Texas. I really want to see how that's written.
Well, I think we'll be embarrassed, and we'll just be relieved and glad that we made it through.
And we're glad we're dead. Yeah, okay. Nice. Jane, always great, always fun. Appreciate the time.
Thank you. Have a great week.
You too. Thanks so much. Oh, look, I've often said that I'd really like to see what they're going to write, just how bad it's going to be. But she's probably right. I'll probably be glad I'm dead. Oh, quick break. Right back. Stick around.
This is why we fight, why we lie awake. This is why we fight.
Finally, radio for the rest of us. Rick Smith.
I'm Rick Smith, and this is Labor History in 2. On this day in labor history, the year was 1950. At 4 p.m. on that day, the U.S. Army completed its takeover of the country's railroads. They were acting on the orders of President Harry S. Truman. Two unions, the Brotherhood of Railroad Trainmen and the Order of Railway Conductors, had threatened a national strike. In the years after World War II, a wave of strikes passed through almost every major industry in the United States. Labor unrest, bottled up by war production, overflowed as the war ended. In 1946 alone, there were more than 5,000 strikes across the nation. Then, in 1950, the United States entered the Korean War. President Truman was determined that railway transport would not be slowed by a strike. He used the war as a justification to seize control of the railroads. The federal government had similarly intervened with the railroads during World War I. Truman established an emergency board to help settle the railroad labor dispute. The unions refused the proposed settlement. The president issued a public statement declaring the railroads essential to the national defense and security of the nation. The Secretary of the Army, Frank Pace Jr., backed up the president. He declared, "We must not permit the flow of essential support to the forces in Korea to be interrupted." The unions went on strike, but Army personnel kept the trains running. In May of 1952, the Union strike ended in defeat. The strikers returned to work under the conditions proposed by the president. Truman tried a similar federal takeover of the steel industry when those workers threatened to strike. However, the steel mill owners fought the takeover all the way to the U.S. Supreme Court and won their case. Labor History in 2 brought to you by the Illinois Labor History Society and The Rick Smith Show. For more information, go to laborhistoryin2.com, like us on Facebook, and follow us on the Twitters at Labor History in 2.
The mistakes of the bosses we must pay for. From the cities to the farmlands and trenches full of mud. 'Cause war has always been the boss's way, sir. Come on, the unit forever defending our rights. Let's fight the right wing, our workers unite. With our brothers and our sisters from many far-off lands.
Welcome back to the Rick Smith Show. Check out our website, thericksmithshow.com. So highlighting that fact that there is most certainly power in the union, you may remember back just before Memorial Day, Trump issued 3 executive orders aimed at destroying the power of the federal government union, the employees union, by stripping away time to investigate and handle grievances, by limiting what the union could actually bargain over. One of those things that they learned from Scott Walker, and also limiting the grievance procedure for disciplinary action. They wanted to fire a bunch of people really quickly. So, taking due process away was their way to do it. And I remember talking back then saying, look, this is something that has to be fought back at this level, because if they get away with it here, kiss it all goodbye for everyone below. So on Friday, a federal judge ruled that, well, they can't do these things. And I'm like, huge win. That's why we've asked J. David Cox to come talk with us. He's the president of the American Federation of Government Employees, AFGE. They are the people who brought the lawsuit. J. David, thanks for taking time for us.
Thanks for having me on the show, Rick. Really appreciate it.
So big win here. I mean, and an important win.
Very, very important win. This is a win for democracy. This is a win against union busting. It's a win for the American people and the taxpayers all the way around. A big, big win.
But you go through and you look at this, and I remember talking about this, and I think we had you on back in May when this came out. Why these executive orders? Why pointed specifically at these things? I mean, the one, investigating grievances and doing the human resource work that the government doesn't have to do seemed to me to be a smart thing, not something you'd want to destroy.
Well, this administration wants to destroy government and they want to destroy unions. And since we're both, they go after us with all zeal and all gusto. But this was a great ruling. Judge Jackson clearly said that it violates the United States Constitution, the First Amendment, all these type things, and also that it violates the checks and balances of the federal government by just basically the president dictating what he wants to do, not allowing Congress to pass laws, and then he could either sign them or veto them. There's a reason we have 3 branches of government.
Right. No, and one of the things, the rolling back protections, due process for workers that are deemed to have deficiencies or have gotten into trouble or whatever. And look, if you've got bad people, you want to get rid of them, but you have to give them due process. There has to be a process in place. She pushed back against this. So my question is, we've seen, and you can attest to this probably better than I can, there have been, thousands of people fired because this administration wants to speed up a process of people that they don't really want, or I would argue like. What happens to those people who are discharged?
Well, part of it, this administration wants a politicized workforce, meaning that the loyalty is to the president, that's the current president of the United States, not loyalty to the taxpayers
right.
and the citizens that they serve. What did this ruling from the judge. It restores our right to represent people, our rights to have time to represent the folks, to present grievances, to see that the wrongs are righted. And then again, if somebody has done something wrong and they've done the crime, they'll pay the time. But it's not just, I decide I want to get you because you didn't vote a particular way. That's wrong. We need a professional civil service workforce.
No, you're absolutely right. Because I don't want to go back to the days of patronage. And it appears to me that that's the path that this Trump administration wants to take us back. Loyalty pledges and all of that stuff. That's a thing of the past, and it should stay on the trash heap of history.
Very much so, Rick. This administration is trying to set the progress of this country back not just 50 years, but 100 years. And this was a good win. This was a good win all the way around for everyone. It shows that the president can't just use executive orders to bypass Congress. Congress has the power to pass laws. He has the right either to veto them or sign them. That's just the way it works. Yeah,
now it brings up a couple of interesting questions for me because what they wanted in essence to do to your members is create an at-will employment scenario where you came in with purple socks today, you're fired for purple socks, or whatever their rationale is. Because look, most people in this country who don't have a union or a contract can be fired for any reason or no reason whatsoever. And part of me says, this is one of those education moments to educate the workforce who doesn't understand exactly what they were trying to strip from your members.
Very much so, and the Congress did change a little over a year ago. All new federal employees are serving a 2-year probationary period. Let's be real. If you can't figure out that a housekeeping aide can do their job at the VA Medical Center in 2 years, it's not a problem with the housekeeping aide. There's a problem with the medical center director and the supervisory chain in that medical center. That's 2 years for a probationary period. Let's be real. And then they want to take away all due process rights.
It's insane to me. And, there's part of me that goes, and I look at, as you said, they passed a law and he's got a couple executive orders now being pushed back. If they were to spend this much time and effort and energy, I don't know, maybe hiring some 50,000 employees that they already don't have instead of wanting to fire a bunch more, maybe our veterans would be getting a little bit better care. Maybe our government would run a little bit better. Maybe things would be a little bit better for, I don't know, we the people.
Very much so. Veterans would be receiving care if they would fill the 49,000 vacancies at the VA, the thousands of vacancies at Social Security. People could get their claims processed for disabilities and other things. We could certainly be making sure that our air and water are safe and not harming us. There's so many good things that government does, but this administration has spent nothing but all its time trying to destroy government.
Yeah, you bring up the EPA, and we've had Gary Morton, the head of the AFGE local here in Philadelphia, who's in charge of part of the EPA representing those members, and the stories that he tells, and it's infuriating what this administration is doing, not just to our veterans and not just to your members, but to the environment, to the air we breathe, the water we drink, to just about every regulatory body in this country.
Well, again, it's all about destroying government, destroying unions. Unions are the ones who make everyone's wages, whether you're a member of a union or not. Unions have driven up wages. We are seeing the actual income of Americans fall lower and lower and lower. Yeah, unemployment's down, but people's earning power continues to be flatline or less, and their take-home money, it's not buying anything for them. It's creating a real problem, and this administration only wants to give big tax cuts to the wealthy of wealthies and everybody else go hungry.
Yeah, with the great kleptocracy. And you're right. There was just a study done recently that pointed exactly what you said out, saying that, if we had the union density of, 1958, when 35% of the workforce was unionized, we would be, I think the number they threw out was 7 to 10% higher in wages for non-union workers, not the union members, but for everybody else, wages would be higher. And you go, duh, I've been saying that for years. I didn't need a fancy study to tell me that. Just makes common sense. But at least now there's some documented paper trail that we can follow on that.
Oh, very much so. I mean, unions have always brought about better wages. They've brought about pension plans, health insurance, paid time off, paid vacation time, holidays, sick leave. All of those type things were brought to you by unions, and people forget that. And as there's less union members in this country, then those wages continue to go down. I personally believe there's not a problem in this country that couldn't be solved by having more union members. And if we could just grow the union movement, we would see all this income inequality go away, discrimination going away, and a lot of things made better, and the economy would be booming because people would have money to spend to make the economy boom.
Well, I would argue the economy would be booming for working people because if you,
I agree with you.
I don't know if you've been following Wall Street. The economy's really booming for some, but the rest of us are kind of
very few.
Exactly, a very few. The rest of us are kind of getting the screw job in this. So the reason, this is one of those moments where you go, education moment, hello, workforce. There could be higher wages out there for you if you just demanded them. Because I've never believed, and you can agree or disagree with me, that I've never believed in the theory of the benevolent employer, that they just give us things out of the wonderful, because their heart is so pure and wonderful. I've never bought that.
It doesn't work that way. I believe in collective bargaining, setting down, negotiating, and the only way you can do that is through a union. And that's why workers need a collective voice so that they can sit down and bargain collectively. Every major religion in this country has teachings in their various laws and governing things of the religion. It says they acknowledge of the right of workers to form and join unions and bargain collectively. So, this president talks a lot about religion. Maybe he needs to understand that having a union is the best way for workers to be represented and to have better wages and benefits.
Yeah, and even if you don't really believe in religion, just the pure ethic of reciprocity, do unto others and you would have them do to you. And I bring that up because we've got a guy running for governor here in Pennsylvania, Scott Wagner, who is the baby Trump, and he reminds me of baby Trump, but also with the policies of Scott Walker out in Wisconsin. He said recently that he wasn't going to return his tax. He was going to put out his tax returns because he didn't want his employees to know how much he earns because those evil unions would go and tell them. And look, just because he said that should make every one of his employees go, well, wait a second. How much is he actually earning if that's the position he's going to take?
Very much so. But the federal government requires all unions to display all their expenditures on the World Wide Web.
Yep.
I don't know why that it should be any different for corporations and particularly for politicians. That it should be an open book. What is it that they're hiding? They're hiding that they are ripping people off and not paying a fair wage and not giving employees their fair share.
No, as I said, when it came out, I said, every one of those employees who sweat and bleed and their backs ache and their arms hurt and they come home at the end of the day smelling because he owns a trash company and all of the pain and the suffering that goes along with that and the broken down bodies after years of service, that is what creates the wealth that he's taking. And I would like to know how much of that he's put in his pocket as opposed to paying those employees who are going through that. And I think it's one of those questions that has to be asked. Let me go back a second because before I let you go, I want to this judge's ruling. While a big win, what are the chances that this goes on and is appealed and eventually overturned? Considering we've got a Supreme Court nominee who I fear after Labor Day heads towards confirmation, and you have a crazy corporate kind of Supreme Court. Do we see something as the path? Do you see what's coming next, or is this a done deal now?
Well, number one, this judge's order took effect immediately. So any agency not adhering to the judge's order is in contempt of court. They're not following the judge's order.
Right.
Even if they appeal, they still have to live with what the judge's ruling and should start going back to the letter of the law and moving forward there. Because I'm not an attorney, I wouldn't want to try to speak in the legal jargon here, but our people, certainly our lawyers did a great case in presenting this and arguing it and getting it overturned, and we will be there with full force and power, not of just AFGE, but the entire AFL-CIO and every one of its affiliates is standing firm and strong with us in this court case, understanding that if we don't stand together, then they'll break each one of us separately.
No, you know, going back to the old days of an injury to one being an injury to all, and this being that obvious case. But the reason I ask is because you've got the Kavanaugh confirmation coming up, and I do view him as someone who would be harmful to workers, especially workers in their labor organizations. So it's another one of those reasons.
Child labor, I can tell you what he would do.
All of that stuff. And it's, for me, it's another opportunity to remind working people, pick up their phones, call their senators, and say that we oppose Kavanaugh's confirmation, and wait until the election to find out who we should be putting in that place. Just a thought.
Very much so.
But Jay David, congratulations on the win. I appreciate the time. I appreciate sharing it with you. Thanks so much.
Thank you so much, Rick. It's always an honor to be on your show.
Appreciate it. Always good to talk to Jay David Cox. He's the president of the American Federation of Government Employees, AFGE. You want to check out their website, afge.org. Quick break. Right back after this. Stick around. You're listening to The Rick Smith Show. We're working people. Come to talk.
Firefighters, my friend, and the kids locked in the Capitol. And we're not gonna break tonight, and we're not gonna bend. Some say the union's down, but I asked around, and everybody said, this is a union town, all down the line. This is a union town, all down the line. And if they come to strip our rights away, we'll give them hell every time. This is a union town, all down the line. Remembering that united we bargain, divided we beg.
I'm Rick Smith, and this is Labor History in 2. On this day in labor history, the year was 1921. That was from the American Professional Football Association. A year later, this would become the National Football League. The Green Bay Club had started up 2 years earlier. Its original sponsor was the Indian Packing Company in Green Bay, Wisconsin. They packaged canned meat. Meat packaging was a major industry in the Midwest during this era. Packing plants in Chicago, Kansas City, Iowa, and Wisconsin processed the cattle and pigs raised in the West as meat to feed the nation. Curly Lambeau was a shipping clerk for the company. He helped to organize a group of local players into a football team. Curly persuaded his boss to donate money for the uniforms, and it was there that the name Packers was born. When the Indian Packing Company fell on hard times, they were bought out by Acme, another packing company based in Chicago. So, for a brief moment, the Green Bay Packers, one of the staunchest rivals of the Chicago Bears, was actually owned by a Chicago company. Although Acme only owned the team for 1 year, the team nickname stuck. Lambeau was able to buy the team back. He went on to become the Packers coach, leading them to 6 championships. The Green Bay Packers are not the only American sports franchise that's name harkens back to a particular kind of labor. Another Wisconsin team, the Milwaukee Brewers baseball team, is a reference to that city's proud beer brewing tradition. In Big Ten sports, the Purdue Boilermakers and Nebraska Cornhuskers take to the gridiron each week with names that reflect the working traditions of the cities where the teams play ball. Labor History in 2 brought to you by the Illinois Labor History Society and The Rick Smith Show. For more information, go to laborhistoryin2.com, like us on Facebook, and follow us on the Twitters at Labor History in 2.
Remembering that united we bargain, divided we beg. Rick Smith.
To this battle, take my union gun. Gonna end this world of slavery, for this war is one you're bound to lose. You fascist about.
Well, today's a good day to be a big fan of Weird Al Yankovic. Love Weird Al. Evidently, he got a star on the Walk of Fame. You knew that was coming. But at his ceremony, he said, quote, "Please don't pickaxe my star. I know it's all the rage these days, but that's not cool. Unless at some point in the future I do something unfathomably monstrous and evil, in which case, sure, fine, go ahead." I think that's great. I think, he's giving you the okay that if he becomes an evil monster, if he ever becomes president and, rips children away from their parents and attempts to break up unions and gives huge tax breaks to the very wealthy and all of the other, the laundry list, colludes with a foreign adversary, all of the laundry list of things that this administration has already done, then he's okay with you pickaxing his star. And I'm hoping that, it never happens, but I guess maybe it would hold up in court. Who knows? Also, you got to love Republicans who looking for that next job while already on the payroll of We the People. Evidently last week, Pam Bondi, she is the Attorney General of Florida. Evidently, she did a kind of a co-hosting gig on Fox News' The Five. For three days. She was a panelist Wednesday through Friday there. And what I thought was funny is that evidently she sought guidance from the Florida Commission on Ethics. And immediately my mind went to, should the word ethics ever be used in the same sentence with the word Florida? I mean, should those go together? It's kind of, I'm not gonna go after Florida too badly, except in this case. Should that be part of it? Evidently, the ethics. Go on. Who cares? I guess that was the reaction. Yeah, who cares? You just can't make it up, can you? I mean, the Onion is going to run themselves out of business. You know that's coming. Also, we're now finding, as I talked about with Propane Jane, that Trump's trying to pardon Manafort. A lot of tension between McGahn and the rest of the staff. And now we find out that evidently there was some discussion about a plea deal while the jurors in Virginia were deliberating. Obviously, it all fell apart. But the fact that they were, let's figure out if we can come to some plea was kind of interesting. Because I got to think that Manafort believes a pardon is in his future, because I guess everybody else around Trump didn't, which is why Cohen went and Weaselberg or I think it's Weisselberg, and the rest of them all went flip flop. But Manafort, he's gonna put it out there and he's gonna hold to the very end, and good for him. Also, finally, a North Carolina federal judge has ruled evidently that the gerrymandered districts, and this is one of those things that, I'm just like, wow, could we have another Pennsylvania scenario so close to election time? Evidently, the gerrymandered districts may have to be redrawn between now and the November elections. Because if you've seen North Carolina's map, there's no argument that they didn't rig those districts. I mean, they're really bizarre looking. But now you've got the judge who's saying, you know what? And this was a 3-panel judge. You're going to have to rewrite these. So it'll be interesting to see how that plays out. And will this set up a legal battle that eventually, oddly enough, going to have to go to the Supreme Court? And again, you look at where things are. We are running into most certainly very dangerous and very, very interesting times. Just is what it is. If you missed any of today's program, thericksmithshow.com. That's where you get the podcast, The Rick Smith Show app. On the smartphone, take the program on the go wherever you go. And as always, you can email me, rick@thericksmithshow.com. Share some of your thoughts with me. I'd love to hear it. Thanks so much. We'll see you tomorrow.
You've been listening to The Rick Smith Show. Together, we can make America better. Email rick@thericksmithshow.com or interact with us anytime at thericksmithshow.com. Until next time, this has been The Rick Smith Show, where working people come to talk.
Its color like tides flood beneath the lunar sway, imperial, mysterious, in amorous ray.